brain tech is an exciting and very fast-growing field. Recent developments in neuroplasticity are leading to promising new non-invasive technologies that could help the brain to self-heal. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists, each of whom is bringing a fascinating new approach and technology to a variety of conditions. Professor David Wilkinson, hello, who is by training an experimental psychologist and neurological scientist at the University of Kent, has developed non-invasive methods of inner ear stimulation to overcome neurodisability, such as Parkinson's. Daniel Mansson, by training a clinical psychologist and the founder of Flow Neuroscience, a neurotech company whose product, Flow, combines brain stimulation with behavioral therapy to treat major depression. And Dr. Elan Schnieder, by training a physical therapist and the founder of TrainPain, which seeks to treat neuropathic pain and chronic pain in fibromyalgic patients through vibration stimulation and brain training gaming approach. Of course, you will each have the opportunity to introduce yourselves much better than I could, but I just want to say how delighted we are to have the experience and the variety to approach this subject. To set the scene, I'd like to start by asking you, David, why this could be seen as a golden age in our understanding of neuroplasticity, and what is possible today that wasn't even possible 10 years ago.
Thanks, Aude, and good afternoon, everybody. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to adapt and respond to stimulation and new learning episodes that it's exposed to. And it manifests in terms of new connections being created between brain cells, between new patterns of activity playing out across brain cells, and in some cases, new cells themselves actually being built. It's a lifelong capability, but it's most evident in newborns and young children, as of course they adapt to their new world. But it's not something that ever goes away. And we've known this for some time, actually. The general rule is that if you place a person in an enriched, stimulating environment, their brain tends to grow. And if you place them in an impoverished environment where there's not a great deal of stimulation, their brains tend to shrink. Now, contrary to common belief, the brain can continue to show neuroplastic change, as we describe it, after injury and after disease onset. What I think has been less well known until quite recently is how best to cultivate and harness those neuroplastic changes. And so what's the best way to have the brain develop new connections within itself? What's the best way to try to have brain cells regenerate? These, for many decades, have been the pressing questions, and a fair degree of success, of newfound success, is now occurring. A fair degree of success can be achieved through drug or pharmacological intervention, but we know simpler pursuits such as exercise and stress-reducing activities can also promote neuroplasticity. Generally speaking, there's a use it or lose it rule, and the more you use your brain, typically the greater the potential for neuroplastic change. Now, one of the most exciting and innovative ways in which one can promote neuroplasticity, which is the topic of today's discussion, is through what we describe as non-invasive neurostimulation, which I suspect Aude will want us to say a little bit more about in a moment. But it is possible to induce really quite profound changes in brain function and some degree structure through this non-invasive neurostimulation, which have been associated with some very dramatic and compelling improvements in people with various forms of neurodisability.
Thank you, David. That's really nice setup. And indeed, I am going to ask each of you how you are illustrating this very point. Elan, if I can start with you, how did you become interested in chronic pain, and how did it lead you to founding TrainPain?
Thank you. So I'm a physical therapist by training, and my first job out of school was working in neurorehabilitation with patients who had suffered from traumatic brain injury and stroke, spinal cord injuries. And in that population, there's a very high, it's very common that many of these patients also suffer from neuropathic pain. And so I started to become very interested in what was, causing pain, what's underlying the pain, and through trying a lot of approaches and not having much success, I started to get very interested in neuroscience to really start to learn more about what's going on in these different conditions. And what I learned is that after a neurological insult, after some sort of damage to the body or damage to the nervous system, there's profound changes that take place. There's the flip side of neuroplasticity, which is the maladaptive neuroplasticity. It's a plasticity of the pain system itself, where the pain system gets more sensitive, where neurons grow and change in certain circuits that generally turn the volume down on the flow of sensory information. Those circuits don't work as well. And circuits that turn the volume up on signaling start to get overactivated. And so all this information was being discovered over the last 20 to 30 years about these profound changes that take place in the nervous system. And everyone was realizing, really from the science community, that these changes are what perpetuate pain. So there's some sort of injury that starts the problem, but actually what keeps it going are these neuroplastic changes. And so it's very clear that the next generation of treatments needs to find ways to actually target these changes in the system. But the tools that we have in rehabilitation are older tools like exercise, which are great, but don't directly target these kinds of changes. Pharmaceutical treatments that have different types of limitations. But many of the treatments were not actually focused on what can we do in the sensory nervous system to kind of reverse these kinds of changes or to promote a healthy neuroplasticity. And so that's where I became very inspired. And there were certain experiments in the fields of cognitive neuroscience and experimental psychology that showed that certain types of sensory training actually could improve and change neuroplasticity in the sensory nervous system and reduce that hypersensitivity. But many of those ideas were experimental. They hadn't really been implemented in any sort of scalable way. And so we came at this really with two questions, which is, what kind of interventions can we create that would be used, you use technology, would be low cost and could be something that patients do in their own home to harness a healthy neuroplasticity, to reduce this hypersensitivity, and also how could we ultimately improve on those techniques to make them more effective and to help more patients. So that was the context.
Thank you. I'll turn to you, Daniel, with a similar question. Can you tell us about Flow's origin story and its link to the technology that makes it possible?
Absolutely. So we started out with being very interested in the problem of depression. So I trained as a clinical psychologist, as you mentioned in the beginning, and started treating patients. But before that, I had done a research project on a technology called TDCS. So it's transcranial direct current stimulation. And we got some great results on people with attentiveness disorders. So I started traveling the world and visiting different scientific conferences and spoke to the professors there, and figured out that there were big studies coming out showing that TDCS trying to target major depressive disorder was very, very effective, roughly as effective as the antidepressants that are on the market today, but with a big advantage of having fewer side effects. So we thought that after I'd done a couple of years of clinical practice, I met up with my co-founder Eric, who's a computational neuroscientist. And we came to the conclusion that we wanted to build a treatment that was very accessible to people, that, as Elan mentioned, that you could use in your home in order to reach the many people. So we took this technology and we put it into an easy to use wearable, and then decided to combine it with behavioral therapy in the form of an app, and then package this together and deliver that as a solution. So it was basically a research project that then turned into a product that then became a company.
Thank you. David, I turn to you now to ask what the nature of your intervention is with Parkinson's. I think it's very interesting that all three of you have a slightly different point of non-invasive stimulation, and I think it's very interesting to understand really what it is targeting.
So the method that we apply targets the inner ear, which includes, along with the hearing apparatus, the balance organs, the organs that that together with the brain help keep you upright, help you know which way is up, which way is down, and help you maintain a steadiness when you move around. Now these balance functions themselves aren't of primary interest to us. What's of interest is that it turns out when people suffer injury or disease to their balance system, they don't just have problems balancing. Actually, they encounter all sorts of difficulties remembering, organizing their thoughts, sleeping, and in their general well-being. Depression and anxiety are really quite common in these people. And this is one of the many clues which tells us that overall brain health, overall brain function is critically reliant upon the messages that it's getting from the balance system. So with that in mind, we wanted to see if we could exploit that connection. And one of the obvious targets was Parkinson's, because Parkinson's involves many, many different features. And the tendrils of the balance system run so far across the brain to so many different brain areas that we know are compromised in Parkinson's. It made sense to see if by artificially stimulating the balance organs via very gentle electric currents applied to the relevant part of the scalp, or by introducing gentle warming or cooling temperatures to the external ear canals, if we could relieve some of these features. And delightfully, it seems that we can. In fact, we can in a way that really we hadn't quite anticipated. The diversity of improvement that we see in people with Parkinson's, not only in terms of their mobility, reducing their freezing, improving their gait, reducing their rigidity, reducing their tremor, but also improving their non-motor symptoms, which can be very hard to reach with drug therapy. So their capacity to sleep, to not suffer so much from depression and anxiety, their ability to remember and to perceive, speech, bladder and bowel control, just a whole list of symptoms that really appear to show quite strong response to the treatment. And most importantly, these effects persist, they endure for several months after the treatment. And the other guys on the call will join me in saying that it's very unusual to find a neurological treatment that continues to work after you stop taking it. So we're very excited by this approach, and I'll get it in now very briefly. To take it forward, we need to open a centre for Parkinson's based around some of these treatments, and for that we are undertaking a fundraising campaign. So if any of your listeners have an interest in Parkinson's and in helping us fight Parkinson's, please do ask. Please do get in touch.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Elan, if I come to you and your description of your intervention, I think one interesting element is the gaming side. Do you want to describe your sort of multi-approach there in your intervention?
So with neuroplasticity, the name of the game is repetition. It's all these types of changes are coming from repetitions of stimuli very often. And so we knew that if we wanted to do some sort of rehabilitation where we would activate these inhibitory circuits through some sort of exercise, which I'll describe in a moment, that in order for it to have any sort of meaningful effect, it would need to be done really thousands of times. And what would be a way to make that feasible for patients to actually do something thousands of times? And so that was really where the gaming came in, which is, could you create a video game that was engaging enough where these types of exercises would be really engaging, would actually be fun to do? And we looked at specifically, which types of video games have, repetitive activities again and again. Every minute you're doing multiple activities. And so we got very interested in the casual mobile video games like Candy Crush and bubble shooters, where people sit for hours over long periods of time, over months, doing a repetitive action again and again. And we explored, how we could layer in sensory rehabilitation exercises into those game mechanics. So instead of just having someone do something that's boring and say, okay, well, here are some points and just do it again, and here are some more points, to actually make it meaningful, using basically what we're doing is we're using information from the body. So the patient pays attention to sensations in their body to solve video game puzzles. And so the clues to solving the puzzles are from sensations that they have in their body. So these are tactile mobile video games. And just to give a brief explanation of what we're doing and how it works, I think the simplest explanation is, if everyone here has been in a cafe and there's all this noise and you're trying to talk to someone, and so you're getting information from the person who's talking to you, and you're also getting all this sensory information from all around you. And a healthy brain is able to decide what it wants to focus on and do this amazing trick where it's able to inhibit and kind of shut off the volume on all that extraneous sensory information, and to be able to just pick one channel of information to focus on. And in order to do that, the brain has to activate these inhibitory circuits for all the different sensory stimuli that it's trying to inhibit and shut off. And it reduces the inhibition in the channels that it wants to pay attention to. And so we thought about that paradigm, what we could do in terms of sensory processing in the body. And so the way we deliver this is we give a tactile stimuli to multiple points in the body, painful and non-painful body parts. And the patient needs to solve this is called sensory discrimination tasks. So the patient will get certain patterns of stimulation, and they need to figure out what was the pattern, how many pulses did they feel, what are the intricate aspects of this pattern of stimulation. So they need to focus on a body part, while at the same time ignoring distracting information that's coming from all over in other places in the body. And in the video game, they're constantly being asked to change where is the target and where is the distractor. And so the area that they needed to ignore now becomes the area they need to pay attention to. The area they were paying attention to now becomes the area they need to ignore. And they do this thousands of times and very rapidly, switching channels of where they need to inhibit and where they need to pay attention to. And this kind of paradigm has been studied in several types of neuroimaging, and we have a pretty good idea about what's going on in the brain during this kind of task. And the thing that's really amazing is there's a very strong association between how well you can perform these tasks and the degree of sensory inhibition that your brain can activate. So so we don't actually measure the brain with sensors. We look at the behavior on the tasks, and we use that as a proxy measure of how the brain is functioning. And we've recently did a study where we looked at this task in pain population and in the healthy population, and we looked at some comparison tasks, and we found very specifically that the patients with pain have a high degree of difficulty in filtering out sensory distractors in the body. And so we have this task. The patient is wearing these tactile stimuli, and they're playing mobile video games. They do this at home for about 15 minutes a day over a period of 6 to 12 weeks, and they do it at home. And we get all this data every time they're playing. The game is adapting, so it's changing the degree of intensity of the different signals and the patterns, and we can start to create a map in their body from the data of how well their brain can process stimuli from painful and non-painful body parts and tailor their training protocol accordingly.
It's a really wonderful approach. And Daniel, you also, I think, have a very interesting combination of behavioral therapy with your non-invasive intervention. Can you describe it to us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part where people don't really know what it is. It's the brain stimulation headset. And as I mentioned before, we're using a technology called TDCS, transcranial current stimulation. And it means that you send in a very weak current. It's, for those who are interested, 2.0 milliamps, the equivalent of a 9-volt battery that you have in your remote control. And we send it in on the left side of the frontal cortex in an area called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And we aim at stimulating the left side of that area. If you want to be even more specific for the ones who are interested, it's called F3, according to the positioning system you have for the brain. And we send it in on that side, we take it out on the right side. And the effect of that is basically that you upregulate or increase the activity of the neurons in the left side and decrease the activities on the right side. And we haven't invented the technology nor the protocol. This is something that's been well researched for many, many years now. And we have taken that protocol and we have put it into this device so that you can use it at home. But as I said before, also, we believe that this shouldn't be used as a monotherapy. And this is partly because the effect sizes are not big enough, or they could be bigger, we believe, by combining it with behavioral therapy. But it's also in order to prevent the disease from coming back. So we give them information at the same time as you're doing the stimulation on how to eat better, how to sleep in a proper way, how to perform physical exercise that we know is super important for depression, and also how to meditate in order to decrease anxiety, but also to regulate your emotions in a better way. So we take these 4 pillars, put it into an easy to use app, and then combine it with the hardware. So in that way, it becomes a little bit more holistic solution that you can also combine, of course, with an antidepressant, or if you choose so, a CBT program together with a therapist. So that's our approach. And we obviously we do this because it's supposed to be super accessible. We want to deliver it to the many people. Sometimes when we come up with solutions, I think we go for the effect sizes, but then you need to do it in a clinic because the side effects are problematic, or because the administration of it requires a clinician. And we wanted to do something that could be delivered in the home. So that's why we choose this specific technology.
Mm-hmm. And yes, and delivering these amazing technologies to all the people who need it is really a big critical part of achieving this. And maybe, David, if I come back to you, you're part of a multidisciplinary team with you know, a very sort of holistic, or at least trying to have a very holistic approach for management of Parkinson's in the community. Can you tell us a little bit more about, I believe, the center where you are trying to gather all of this knowledge and these interventions?
Yeah, so the centre is the focus of the fundraising campaign. But what the centre recognises is that with Parkinson's disease, and actually other neurological diseases as well, the level of community need is not adequately met currently. And that's both the case here in the UK as well as in the US and other countries too. So individuals with Parkinson's typically have quite good access to drug therapy, but the drug therapy really doesn't cover all of the features of Parkinson's. Parkinson's is a multifaceted condition, and it requires a multifaceted treatment approach, which doesn't just involve drug therapy, but involves physiotherapy, counseling, other forms of psychotherapy, speech and language therapy, access to these experimental non-invasive stimulation protocols that you're hearing about today. Art therapy, dietary advice. There are all sorts of non-pharmacological treatments for Parkinson's, which are very hard to get hold of within the community. And when you do get hold of them, they're typically at different locations. And so they're accessed, if at all, in very piecemeal fashion. What needs to happen is everything needs to be brought under one roof where it's easily accessible, and the treatments can be administered in a joined up, integrated manner. And in doing that, there's clear reason to expect a much better outcome in the management and support of people with Parkinson's. And of course, once you have a centre, you can wrap all sorts of research projects around it to improve combination of therapies, get the combination of therapies right through research to better understand the condition. And of course, you can train the next generation of scientists and doctors through educational programs that you affiliate to the centre. So there's very strong need for it within Parkinson's. You know, we have people with Parkinson's clamoring for it. We just need the money to open the thing.
And Daniel and Elan, as entrepreneurs, I mean, it's also, you know, how do you get your product, your intervention to as many people as possible, and what are some of the obstacles in the way? Maybe Daniel, if I start with you, you already have a sort of, let's call it a B2C model in place, but what are some of the obstacles to a more massive rollout of your intervention?
Yeah, there are many different obstacles, but I would say that the first one is the regulatory obstacle that you need to go through, and a very, very important one. You need to make sure that everything is safe and effective before you can roll out something. And then the trust element is very important. So we have an education process where you need to get information to the actual patient, to the clinicians, and then in the end to the payers, in order for this to become a mass solution. So we have these different steps that we need to educate them on different levels. From a patient point of view, make sure that they understand that it's a safe treatment that they can use at home and so on. With the clinicians, that they can combine with other treatments, and that they can use it in their common practice. And then the payers is more about health, economy, and so on. Then I would say the rollout is, I mean, reach. It requires a lot of money in order to take any kind of solution, especially a medical one, and inform people about this. Often longer, should we say, sales processes, and the education part comes in there. We need to first educate and then move, if I'm talking marketing language, down the funnel in order for them to then actually buy it. So there are many obstacles, but I would say that the main one is the education one, to tell people about it and what it does, and that they shouldn't be afraid of it, and then that it's actually an effective treatment, and that could be potentially in the future used before an antidepressant, or, as I said before, together with an antidepressant, in order to get to results a lot quicker and a lot more effective.
Mm-hmm. And Elan, I understand you have some ongoing clinical trials, but from your perspective, what are some of the obstacles in your way?
Yeah, sure. So I think that in terms of a scalable solution, I think that the healthcare system and reimbursement is probably the biggest obstacle in the area that needs to be resolved. We're a digital therapeutics company, so we're creating digital solutions to treat medical diseases, and this is a new type of product. It's only been a few years since the FDA was approving these types of products. A few companies have gotten FDA approved digital therapeutics through the FDA process, but the insurance companies are still a few years away from being able to have a full framework on evaluating and approving and reimbursing these products. They want to see real world impact, healthcare economics data, and it's early still for these products to be demonstrating that. So it looks like it's going to be another a year or two before those frameworks are really in place for reimbursement and really widespread adoption and scaling of these types of solutions.
Mm-hmm. Well, Conduit members are very active in their communities, and usually if they are members, it's because they want to move things forward. And so before we open up to questions for everyone, I wanted to ask each of them what course of action or source of information you can offer for our members. What if you need, partnerships or, introductions to hospitals, or what are the things that our members can help you with? Elan, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure thing. So first of all, we are doing clinical trials, but in particular, we're very interested in introductions to healthcare systems, to hospitals, to pain clinics. We're interested in being beta sites or doing collaborative research on our technology. Obviously, as an early stage startup, we're fundraising. We're doing seed rounds of fundraising, and if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to share more details on that. And also recruiting for our trials. So we have trials right now in New York, in Israel, and in Belgium on fibromyalgia, on chemotherapy-induced neuropathic pain. And so if anybody is in Belgium or Israel or New York and interested and knows people with fibromyalgia or chemotherapy-induced neuropathic pain, we'd be happy to have people enroll in our studies.
Thank you. Daniel, what about you?
Yeah, it's similar. We are running two large RCT trials at the moment after two successful pilots, one in Brazil and one in East London, University of East London. And it's based in the US also. So we're looking for patients there to enroll. That's very important for us. But I would say that the most important part for us is to start, should we say, pilots in the hospitals. So we have a couple already, but we are interested in moving forward with that in different parts of the world, primarily in Europe right now. So introductions to hospitals and people there, clinicians, would be amazing.
Great. And David, we know about your fundraising campaign for your center, but are there other partnerships, introductions that could be interesting for you?
No, we're very clear. We need £600,000 by Christmas to get this centre on the road and address the growing crisis of Parkinson's disease.
Okay, great. So I'm going to, some questions have been answered already in writing, but I think it's always nice to have to have them shared with everyone. So Ilona said she would be very interested to hear more of all of us, sort of, what can we use to increase our neuroplasticity as sort of healthy and wanting to remain healthy beings. So David, you answered a little bit, but Elan, do you have any comments?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, from a physical therapy perspective, in terms of movement, one of the greatest drivers of healthy neuroplasticity is movement. And I think that, we often think about exercise, to be focusing on strength or flexibility or endurance, and those are all important. But I think that from a neuroplasticity perspective, novelty, thinking about, doing movements, and particularly, things like yoga or Feldenkrais, and there's nothing magical about those specific approaches to movement, but any sort of thing where you're exploring new movements, where you're doing things that aren't the typical, stereotypical patterns, and kind of feeding your nervous system and your motor system with different motor patterns that you can do with different types of sensory input that you get from doing different types of movements. I think that, is one area where it's part of promoting healthy neuroplasticity. In terms of diet, we know that there's certain foods, healthy foods like omega-3 and other types of nutrients that seem to be helpful in promoting neuroplasticity. So maybe I'll stop there and let the other panelists share some other ideas.
I can chip in there. I think those are really, really important things to have as a basis. I would say in my area of TDCS, there's been numerous studies that have examined, for example, using TDCS for working memory improvement and potentially when you're trying to learn a new language, that you can stimulate the areas that are mostly associated with speaking a language. I would say that the studies there are a little bit so-so. So we have seen very clear effects on people that are, for example, depressed or have some other mental illness. But when it comes to the healthy population, it's a little bit more difficult to say. So I would be a little bit cautious with using these devices on if you are healthy. Maybe in the future, when we become a little bit more specific with how we stimulate and we know more about the brain, that could be possible. But right now, I'm a little bit skeptical towards using these technologies like that, to be honest.
Yeah, I would add just one more thing on that, which is that, so much of the research and what's been promising is really in vulnerable populations, in populations where there's some disease process going on that's driving, a maladaptive neuroplasticity and unhealthy neuroplasticity, and looking there what we can do to either stop or slow down or reverse that kind of negative change or unhealthy change. And as Daniel mentioned, it's tricky to know which of these strategies actually boost performance in healthy individuals and whether it's something that's sustainable and really works.
Mm-hmm. I have another question here for you, Elan, on your intervention's efficacy on seniors or people with difficulty concentrating. Is that does that make it more challenging to intervene?
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit of work in fibromyalgia, and one of the kind of core symptoms of fibromyalgia is not just pain, but it's a cognitive or mental fuzziness, mental fog. And so we definitely have a lot of people using our intervention who have comorbid ADHD or general fatigue, difficulty concentrating. And we've also had quite a few seniors, people in their 70s, and even 80s use our intervention. What we do is every single sensory task that a person does, and a person does more than 120 in a single 15-minute session, every single task is examined by the algorithms and adjusted. And so as soon as the algorithm is detecting that a person is struggling, it reduces the difficulty of the tasks. And so the tasks are always calibrated right at that level that is appropriate for the person. We also look at stress levels through self-report. And if a person is kind of working too hard, concentrating too hard, and they feel more stressed or fatigued just from trying to concentrate. So we actually collect that information, and our algorithms consider both the objective performance, how well they can perform the tasks, but also how they're feeling. And it puts all that information together, pain, mood, stress, and behavioral performance on these sensory tasks to customize the training. So we put a lot of effort into making it work for these populations.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah. And a question from Tamsin for each of you. At what level of either the pain, depression, or Parkinson's do your interventions begin to have an impact? And is there a level where they stop? And David, I think you answered this on the regulatory approval, but perhaps Tamsin was also interested in asking whether there is sort of a U-shape on the intervention in terms of an ideal moment for it to start or to end. David, do you want to?
Yeah, that's a good question too. In general, there's an absence of what we describe as dose-response studies with this technology. A lot of the work has been showing initial proof that it works and trying to generate conditions where we can show effects that really have everyday relevance for people with these different conditions. When you're designing these studies, it can be quite difficult to know how much dose to give someone, the intensity, and also the duration of the treatment. I mean, the others may have different views, but my sense is we're still finding our way. So with the approach that I'm taking, we start to see quite marked improvements within about a week, and then we continue to stimulate. It's a home-based treatment. People continue to stimulate at home for a month or two, during which time they continue to improve, and then the biggest improvements are found about a month down the line after they stop, and then they gradually return to baseline. So in that sense, it is kind of U-shaped in the way that most medicines and forms of therapy are. But what treatment protocol is needed to really stretch out that, I think, still requires a fair bit of investigation, if I'm quite honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, do you want to add?
Yeah, I fully agree with David there that this is a very good question. I think that what the home-based solutions are offering in the end is the ability to scale up a treatment and to collect data which could improve the personalization of a treatment. So in our case, would it be more effective to go to 2.5 milliamps or increase the duration of the stimulation to 40 minutes instead of 30, or do more sessions per week for a certain population, for a certain group? That can be examined in real world data, much easier than to do a placebo-controlled trial. Because in a placebo-controlled trial, we're doing around 250 patients right now. And if you're going to 300, the costs are enormously higher. So I think the really interesting thing that we're all doing in this panel is to be able to deliver it at home and then collect the data, and then in the future be able to do a more personalized approach to it. And then you can increase the effects for many different populations within these big groups. So I think that's really interesting.
I'd like to add just something to that. So there's a few points. So we found in our post hoc analysis, this is looking at the data after you've done the trial, not with a specific hypothesis, but more exploring after to see what kind of patterns you can find. So we found no association between the amount of baseline pain that someone has and the responsiveness to the treatment. So obviously, like any treatment, not everybody responds. And so when you look at, okay, who are the people who will respond versus the people who don't respond, we saw no association between how much pain a person has at baseline. So that was one thing we noticed. We saw a very strong, very statistically strong relationship between the amount of practice and the amount of benefit. So we saw quite clearly that the more people practiced, the better they got. And it was a pretty good relationship that was, and so we're trying to now adjust our protocols to involve more training. Now, there's several ways to add more training. You can do a longer training session, or you can keep the training sessions short and extend the amount of time that the person is engaging. And we're going with the latter strategy because we believe that if you increase the time of training, like our training, which is active and it involves concentration and focus, if you have people doing that for too long at once, that they're more likely to burn out and get bored. And so we're keeping the sessions short. People are highly engaged in the games. And then we do it over a longer period of time. It's a hypothesis that we made, and that's the direction we're moving in, but nobody knows for sure. And the last thing I'll mention is, when to intervene. So with pain, it's very clear. The sooner, the better. So if someone has an injury and they're starting to go in this direction of chronic pain, the sooner you intervene, the better. The longer the pain is there, the longer these maladaptive neuroplastic changes stick around, the harder it is to rehabilitate. And so we're also doing studies now and looking at people right after surgery who had a nerve injury during surgery or who had a damage to their nerves from chemotherapy. If we intervene early, can we prevent the development of that chronic pain? Or for people who are already in that trajectory where they're not getting better, intervene as soon as possible before it sets in and it's much more difficult to treat.
I have a question here from Heather for you, Elan. what you've described about a healthy brain being able to ignore sounds which aren't the main focus, would that type of training be able to help with misophobia?
Okay, so I don't know much about misophobia. I think perhaps Heather's referring to misophonia, but I'm not sure. Like, so some sort of like aversive reaction to certain sounds, where you hear a sound and you find that sound very upsetting. So if that is what you're asking, I'll comment on that. So in pain, we certainly have that where someone who has chronic pain or neuropathic pain, any stimulation they get from that body part, it can trigger activation of these emotional networks in the brain. It's like almost like any stimulation that's coming up from this body part is already activating these emotional networks in the brain and giving very strong emotional reactions to the stimulation. And that's why things like in meditation, one of the things you're trying to do is create like a non-judgmental or non-reactive response to the stimulation. You're trying to train your brain not to have a very strong emotional response to the sensory input. And so what we're doing in our intervention, this is actually one of the things we designed around, is this idea of, well, what if you play a video game with that body part that's hurting? So normally the brain is used to activating in a very negative emotional way in response to sensory stimulation from the affected body part. Well, what if now you need to pay attention to sensory stimulation to win a game and have fun? And so you're stimulating this area, and then you're at the same time trying to activate the brain networks for reward and pleasure, which are the things that are activated in video games, dopamine networks and opioids and other interesting things that happen in the brain when you play video games and when you win rewards. And so we're trying to kind of change that loop. So the sensory stimulation will no longer be associated with negative affect, negative emotion, and more positive. So similar to what I think you're asking here about the sounds, certain sounds that trigger negative emotional responses, it would be very interesting to use those same annoying sounds that bother you, but to actually integrate that into a sensory discrimination protocol where you're using it to play video games. And in fact, this is an area that we did explore a little bit, but it's not our focus right now. But it is quite interesting and I think very relevant.
Thank you. Another question from Ilona about, but I suspect it's going to be similar to the healthy people answer, but how can parents who want to help their children do well at school, anything specifically recommended to increase focus, etc.? Who would like to take this one?
I can talk about it a little bit. Yeah, my response is similar. There's been studies showing an increased focus with stimulation, and actually similar stimulation to what we're doing for depression. For some reason, it's very beneficial for many diseases to stimulate or increase the activity on the left side of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So there's been some studies like that, but you always have to take into consideration the risk-benefit analysis. It's a very safe method. Speaking about TDCS again, but there is always a risk, and I think that should be considered. So let's see what happens in the future, but for now, I wouldn't use that to increase focus.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps a sort of a thinking, already there's been so much extraordinary changes and developments in the last 10 years, it can make one really optimistic about the next 10 years. For each of you, what do you see the future look like in your domain, and the most optimistic future probably, and the role? What does the role of the clinician become with these technologies and the possibilities of self-healing at home? David, do you want to start?
I think that the answer has to be premised on the fact that about 20 years ago we were promised somewhat of a false dawn in terms of a pharmacological revolution that was going to eradicate dementia, reverse brain injury, we were being offered, a future vision of drug therapy that would deal with everything that went wrong in the brain. And as everyone knows, there have been some very notable successes, but there have been many neurological conditions that remain very difficult to manage with drug therapy, which in some way scaffolds the future, doesn't it? There will continue to be innovations within drug therapy that will continue to improve outcome and everyday experience for people with neurodisability. But my sense is we need a more integrated approach, which recognises that there are other non-pharmacological ways of unlocking potential within the diseased or the damaged brain, and that potential is unlocked by some of the technologies that your listeners have heard about this morning. There will be other ways to unlock it as well, which don't require recourse to drugs. And so you asked me what's going to happen in the coming years. Drug therapy will get better, but hopefully it will become much better integrated with these non-invasive technologies, many of which can be done in the comfort of one's home. That's where I hope things go.
Mm-hmm. Elan, do you want to give your vision?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the vision even broader than technology, just in terms of pain. I think that that this understanding of pain really as a chronic pain, I'm talking about as a disorder of neuroplasticity, I think is spreading. The awareness of that is spreading. And I think that what's going to happen is that the conversations between doctors and patients are going to change. And so, when a doctor does an MRI, instead of, focusing on, well, this is the degeneration in your spine and trying to come up with some sort of treatment for these biomechanical changes in the body, much more often they'll be thinking about, okay, well, in what ways is the sensory nervous system hypersensitive? And what kind of treatment program can we create of different modalities to reduce that hypersensitivity, to promote healthy neuroplasticity, and to harness, the body's natural ability to reduce pain? How can we promote that system and enhance it? And I also think that a lot of the standard treatments, even things like exercise, are going to change. It's no longer going to be, how can we make your muscles stronger? But as I alluded to before, how can we use movement as a way to drive healthy neuroplasticity? And so I think that those are some of the big changes that we're going to see, at least in the world of pain, in the next decade or so.
Thank you. And you, Daniel?
Yeah. So I want to take a different approach. I would say that the revolution that has been going on in technology, it's already here and it's moving over into the health space. So that's already a given. But what I also believe will happen in the future is a sort of a revolution when it comes to how we collect evidence. As I said before, a very important part of that is home-based treatments. You can have a lot of data points, and you can collect them, and you can hopefully analyze them in a good way, and then go to the regulators, because they are controlling what kind of treatments can get out there, and actually prove to them that this is something that we should do it a little bit different for this patient population, a little bit different for that patient population. So this needs to happen also, a revolution in the regulatory way of looking at evidence and how we collect evidence. The technology, there will always be a lot of progress within that field. And I mean, just to mention something, the closed loop scenarios where we can read the brain in some way, EEG or FNIRS or other technologies, and then do something based on that with brain stimulation, for example. That's super interesting. That will come, but we also need a way to prove it in a proper way, in a scientifically correct way, and then have the regulators approve of that way of proving it also. So that, I think, is needed, but I also think I see great progress being done in those fields also.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to really thank the three of you very much for your contributions today. I think it's really fascinating to see what you're working on, and I really hope that the conduit community can help with your progress. So thank you very much. And for everyone, there will be a follow-up email where you know, we can sort of, you know, for anyone interested, can continue being in touch and think about the topic. And I also just want to point at you, although I think we will put it again in the email, the link to the YouTube video that was posted in the chat, which about David's intervention. Thank you, Ramali's just posted it again. So thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch, and see you all hopefully in person very soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.